What if I told you that your relentless thinking, the way your mind seems to dive deeper and deeper into itself, isn't just a habit but a double-edged sword? It's as if your thoughts, which should help you navigate life, have instead turned into a labyrinth, trapping you in endless loops of analysis, doubt, and existential questioning. Have you ever felt this way? Like you're so lost in your mind that the world outside seems faint, almost irrelevant? Carl Jung, one of the most profound thinkers of the modern age, called this the curse of deep thinking. But here's the twist: he didn't see it as something to escape, something evil or broken that needed fixing. Instead, Jung believed that this curse is a hidden blessing, a gift if you know how to wield it. The question is, how do you stop feeling trapped by your own mind? How do you turn this curse into a tool for growth, understanding, and even freedom? Today, we're going to uncover Jung's solution to deep thinking. By the end of this journey, you'll understand not just why your mind works the way it does, but how to master it. But first, let me ask you, why do you think so much? Pause for a moment. Really think about that question. Are you driven by a desire to figure things out, to make sense of life? Or is it something else? Maybe fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of uncertainty, fear of what might happen if you don't think things through enough. Jung believed that this underlying fear is at the core of why deep thinking can feel like a curse. You see, deep thinkers are often caught in a paradox. On one hand, your mind craves clarity, truth, and understanding. You want to peel back the layers of reality and uncover what's underneath. But on the other hand, the deeper you go, the more you confront uncertainty, complexity, and even your own insecurities. It's a battle between curiosity and fear. And here's the kicker: fear isn't something to avoid. Jung believed that fear is a doorway, a portal into the parts of ourselves that we usually ignore or suppress.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
So let me ask you this: what are you most afraid of discovering about yourself? Deep thinking, when it feels overwhelming, is often your mind's way of leading you toward that fear. Jung called this the shadow, the parts of you that you don't want to see. The insecurities, doubts, and even darker instincts that you bury deep inside. The reason deep thinking feels like a curse is because it constantly brushes up against this shadow. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that you'd rather leave hidden. But here's where Jung's genius comes into play. He didn't see the shadow as something bad. He saw it as a missing piece of the puzzle, a part of yourself that, if embraced, could make you whole. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In other words, you can't find peace by running from your fears. You have to turn around, face them, and bring them into the light. Now, this sounds great in theory, but how do you actually do it? The first step is to slow down. When your thoughts are racing, it's easy to feel like you're drowning in them. But Jung believed that insight comes not from speeding up, but from pausing. When was the last time you truly sat with your thoughts without distractions, without judgment? Take a moment to write them down. Yes, write them. There's something almost magical about putting thoughts to paper. It's like taking the storm in your head and turning it into something you can see, something you can hold. And once it's there in front of you, you can start to notice patterns. What keeps coming up? What thoughts do you circle back to over and over again? Once you've identified these recurring thoughts, ask yourself, why do I think this bothers me so much? And then ask why again and again. Keep asking why until you get to the root of it. Jung believed that most of our thoughts, especially the obsessive ones, are just symptoms of something deeper, something we haven't yet acknowledged. Now, here's the tough part when you uncover that deeper fear or insecurity. Don't push it away. Don't judge it. Instead, sit with it. Try to understand it. This is what Jung meant by making the darkness conscious. It's not about fixing your flaws or getting rid of your fears. It's about accepting them as part of who you are. Because here's the paradox: the more you embrace your flaws, the less power they have over you. And the less power they have, the freer your mind becomes. But let's zoom out for a moment. What if the reason you think so much isn't just personal? What if it's something bigger? Jung believed that when we think deeply, we're not just exploring our own minds, we're tapping into something universal. Something he called the collective unconscious. Imagine this: every thought you've ever had, every question you've ever wrestled with, has been asked by someone else, somewhere, at some point in history. The great thinkers of the past, Socrates, Buddha, Nietzsche, they were all navigating the same labyrinth as you. So when you feel overwhelmed by your thoughts, remember this: you're not alone. You're part of a much larger journey, a journey that humanity has been on since the beginning of time. This brings us to a profound realization: maybe the goal of deep thinking isn't to find answers. Maybe the goal is to grow. Every time you wrestle with a difficult question, you're expanding your mind. You're learning to see the world in new ways. And that's the real gift of deep thinking. It forces you to evolve. But this gift comes with a choice. You can let your thoughts consume you, turning the curse of deep thinking into a prison. Or you can use your thoughts to confront your fears, embrace your flaws, and grow into the person you're meant to be. So the next time you're caught in a spiral of overthinking, stop and ask yourself, what part of myself am I running from? Because the moment you stop running, the curse of deep thinking starts to lift. Let me leave you with one final question. What if the very thing you're most afraid of is the key to your freedom? Because as Jung would say, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And maybe, just maybe, deep thinking isn't a curse at all. Maybe it's the path. Have you ever noticed how the mind seems to resist stillness? The deeper you go into thought, the more your brain creates noise, questions, doubts, flashes of memories, imagined futures. It's like your mind is afraid of what silence might reveal. Carl Jung believed this constant mental activity wasn't random. He saw it as a defense mechanism, a way the psyche distracts itself from the things it doesn't want to face. And here's the strange part: the more intelligent or introspective you are, the stronger this resistance becomes. Thinking deeply doesn't just uncover truths about the world, it exposes truths about yourself. That's the part most people aren't ready for. Jung argued that there's a reason the human mind is structured this way. We're wired for survival, not for clarity. Imagine the mind as a vast house with many rooms, but most of the doors are locked. Behind those doors are things you've suppressed, parts of your personality, traumatic memories, impulses you don't want to admit to having. The mind keeps these doors shut to protect you, but at the same time, it knows they're there. It's why you feel restless, why you overthink, why no amount of logic seems to quiet your thoughts. Here's where Jung's solution becomes radical. The locked doors aren't the problem. The problem is thinking the house is only livable if everything is perfectly sorted. The mind is messy because life is messy, and trying to organize it all into neat conclusions will only exhaust you. But at the same time, ignoring it isn't the answer either. Jung believed the key was learning to live with the tension, to stop trying to fix the chaos and instead let it teach you something. He called this holding the tension of opposites. For example, when you're stuck overanalyzing a problem, it's rarely just about the problem. Maybe you're trying to make a decision, but underneath it, there's a fear of failure or a need for control or even a fear of success. Overthinking is just the surface. The real work is understanding what's underneath, and then resisting the temptation to either suppress it or fix it too quickly. Instead of rushing to solve, Jung would say to sit with the tension. Let the fear, doubt, or confusion be there without trying to escape. The insight doesn't come from running toward clarity, but from staying in the discomfort long enough for something new to emerge. This isn't about being passive. It's about trusting that your mind already knows what it needs to do. The endless thinking is your psyche's way of working through something. The more you fight it, the louder it gets. But if you really listen, it begins to organize itself. That's the paradox of deep thinking. The harder you try to control it, the more chaotic it feels. But the moment you stop trying to win, the noise starts to settle. Here's the real question: what if the thoughts you're so desperate to quiet are the ones you most need to hear? Jung believed that the mind works in symbols, not logic. Dreams, random associations, even the strange thoughts that pop into your head when you're daydreaming, they're all messages. They're how the unconscious communicates with the conscious mind. But most of us dismiss these messages. We think of them as noise, distractions, or signs that something is wrong with us. Jung's genius was in realizing that these fragments of thought are actually guiding us. The mind is like a compass, constantly pointing us toward the things we need to confront, accept, or integrate. Take a moment to think about the kinds of thoughts you avoid. Not the obvious ones, the mundane worries or the everyday frustrations, but the ones that make you uncomfortable in a deeper way. Maybe it's a thought about a failure you've never quite let go of, or a regret, or a desire you're ashamed of. These aren't random. They're part of the shadow Jung often wrote about. The shadow is everything you've rejected about yourself. It's the version of you that you don't want the world to see. But here's the part: no one tells you the shadow isn't just where your flaws live. It's also where your potential hides. Think of it like this: the parts of yourself you suppress are often the same parts that hold your greatest strength. A person who suppresses anger might also be suppressing their ability to stand up for themselves. Someone who hides their vulnerability might also be hiding their capacity for deep connection. Jung's solution wasn't to fix the shadow, but to integrate it, to bring those hidden parts of yourself into the light. Integration doesn't mean you let the shadow take over. It means you stop pretending it doesn't exist. Here's an example. Imagine someone who's always overthinking because they're terrified of making the wrong choice. They get stuck in analysis paralysis, trying to weigh every possible outcome, but no decision ever feels safe enough. Jung would say this person's fear of failure isn't something to eliminate, it's something to understand. Maybe that fear is trying to protect them from something deeper, like the pain of disappointing others or even themselves. Overthinking isn't the problem. It's a symptom of a deeper wound. And by acknowledging that wound, by facing it without judgment, they can start to heal. This is where Jung's work becomes incredibly practical. The goal isn't to stop thinking deeply. It's to stop being afraid of where your thoughts might take you. So the next time you're caught in a spiral of endless thought, try this: instead of pushing the thoughts away, invite them in. Treat them like visitors. Ask, why are you here? What do you want me to know? And then listen. Not with the intention of fixing anything, but with curiosity. You'll notice something surprising. When you stop resisting, the thoughts lose their intensity. They stop feeling like an attack and start feeling more like a conversation. This might sound strange, but Jung believed that the mind is self-healing. The very act of allowing your thoughts to exist without judgment or suppression is what helps them resolve. It's like a wound that heals when you stop picking at it. Here's the part where things get even more profound. Jung believed that deep thinking isn't just about the individual. It's about something much bigger. He had this concept called the collective unconscious. It's the idea that every human mind is connected through a shared pool of symbols, archetypes, and experiences. When you're wrestling with a question, you're not just working through your own personal struggles, you're tapping into something universal. That's why the questions that haunt you the most feel so timeless. Questions about meaning, purpose, love, and death, they're the same questions every human has faced since the beginning of time. This is where deep thinking becomes a gift. It connects you to something bigger than yourself. Every time you wrestle with these questions, you're participating in the same process that artists, philosophers, and thinkers have gone through for centuries. But here's the irony: the more you try to solve deep thinking, the further you get from its purpose. Jung believed that the mind isn't a problem to be solved. It's a mystery to be lived. So instead of trying to escape the depth of your thoughts, what if you learn to embrace them? What if you stopped seeing your mind as a trap and started seeing it as a guide? Because maybe the point of deep thinking isn't to find answers. Maybe the point is to grow into someone who can live with the questions. There's a strange discomfort that comes with not knowing. We want clarity, certainty, a sense of control over our lives and thoughts. But the irony is, the harder we try to pin everything down, the more life seems to slip through our fingers. Carl Jung understood this tension. He saw it not as something to overcome, but as a necessary part of being human. Deep thinking is often misunderstood. Most people assume it's about solving problems or finding answers. But Jung believed it was about something far more profound. He saw it as a way to connect with the parts of reality in ourselves that can't be neatly explained. Think about this: everything you experience is filtered through your mind. Who you are, what you believe, the memories you carry, they shape the way you see the world. But have you ever stopped to consider how much of what you think you know might not be true? Jung believed that most of what we accept as truth is actually a projection. We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. Our fears, desires, and biases color everything. This is why overthinking can feel so exhausting. It's not just that you're analyzing situations, you're also wrestling with the way your own mind distorts them. For example, have you ever replayed a conversation in your head, convinced that someone was judging you or misunderstood you? That sense of unease doesn't come from the other person, it comes from the way you interpret their words through your own insecurities. Jung's solution wasn't to try to stop these thoughts. He believed that the projections themselves hold valuable information. They act like mirrors, showing you the parts of yourself that need attention. Instead of asking, "Why am I overthinking this?" the better question might be, "What does this reaction reveal about me?" Not because you're trying to fix yourself, but because understanding these patterns gives you freedom. Here's a simple way to think about it when you're stuck in a loop of overthinking. It's like being lost in a forest. The more you panic and try to find an immediate way out, the more lost you feel. But if you stop and pay attention to the trees, the sounds, the ground beneath your feet, you start to notice things you didn't see before. The way forward might not be obvious, but it begins to reveal itself. Jung believed that the mind works in a similar way. The thoughts that frustrate you the most, the ones that keep looping back, no matter how hard you try to move past them, are often pointing towards something meaningful. They're not obstacles, they're signals. But there's a catch. These signals rarely speak in a clear, logical voice. The unconscious doesn't communicate in words or straightforward ideas. It speaks through symbols, emotions, dreams, and gut feelings. And the more you try to force understanding, the more elusive they become. Take dreams, for example. Jung was fascinated by them because he saw them as messages from the unconscious. But he also believed that they're not meant to be taken literally. A dream about falling, for instance, isn't necessarily about a physical fall. It might be about a fear of losing control or a need to let go of something in your life. In the same way, the thoughts that overwhelm you during the day often carry symbolic meaning. A fear of failure might not just be about failing, it might be tied to a deeper belief about your worth or identity. The key, Jung said, is to approach these thoughts with curiosity instead of resistance. Imagine you're meeting an old friend you haven't seen in years. You wouldn't rush to judge them or dismiss what they're saying. You'd listen, even if their words were confusing or uncomfortable. This is how Jung approached the mind. He believed that every thought, no matter how frustrating or irrational it seemed, had something to teach us, but only if we were willing to listen without trying to control the outcome. Here's something worth considering. What if the very act of overthinking is your mind's way of trying to heal itself? When you're caught in a loop of doubt or worry, it can feel like your brain is attacking you. But Jung saw it differently. He believed that the psyche has an innate drive toward wholeness. Even when it feels chaotic, it's always working to bring balance, to integrate the parts of you that have been ignored or rejected. Think of it like a stream of water. If you try to block the flow, it builds pressure. But if you let it move naturally, it finds its own path. Overthinking works the same way. The harder you fight it, the more overwhelming it becomes. But if you let it flow, if you stop trying to control it, it starts to lose its power over you. Here's the truth most people don't want to face: no amount of thinking will ever make life completely safe or predictable. You can analyze every possibility, plan for every outcome, and still life will surprise you. Jung believed that the goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty, but to learn how to live with it. This is why he placed so much emphasis on the concept of trust, not in the sense of blind faith, but in the sense of trusting the process of life itself. He believed that the unconscious mind, the part of you that you can't fully understand or control, has a wisdom of its own. But trusting that process requires letting go of the need for certainty. And that's not easy. The human mind is wired to seek answers, to close loops, to resolve tension. Letting those loops remain open feels unnatural, even frightening. Yet that's exactly what Jung believed was necessary for growth. He saw life as a balancing act between opposites: control and surrender, thinking and feeling, order and chaos. The more you cling to one side, the more unbalanced you become. This is why deep thinking feels like such a curse when it's out of balance. It becomes a trap, a way of avoiding the parts of life that can't be solved through logic. But when it's balanced with trust, with an openness to the unknown, it transforms into a gift. What's fascinating is that this approach doesn't just change your relationship with your mind, it changes the way you see the world. When you stop trying to control every thought, you also stop trying to control everything around you. You start to notice things you used to overlook: the subtle ways life communicates with you, the moments of unexpected beauty, the connections between events that seemed random before. Jung believed that this awareness is what gives life meaning. Not the answers we find, but the ability to live fully in the questions. So maybe the real challenge isn't how to stop thinking so much. Maybe the challenge is how to let your thoughts exist without letting them control you. How to hold uncertainty without being consumed by it. How to see your mind not as an enemy, but as a partner in the unfolding mystery of life. And maybe, just maybe, that's where freedom begins.